Welcome to today's artifact, show number 8. This time we're still on fallout shelter material. We're still in the Cold War. And as you can see in front of me are all these various things that are involved with food in the fallout shelter. So let's first of all go back to the Cold War. Let's go back to 1961. Here we have a nice Life magazine, and it states on it how you can survive fallout. 97 out of 100 people can be saved. Details for building shelters. Now, there are all kinds of shelters. You can have one in your house. You can have public ones. You have all sorts of different things. And that's kind of what everybody was looking around. Now, most people could not afford a fallout shelter, but the government did provide you with a catalog on how you could make them on the cheap, even to the point of putting in a little concrete block section of your basement. And then we have, again, this time's from 1962, and things are getting closer because the Cuban Missile Crisis is the closest that I've always felt to being doomed. You know, when in the town I lived in, that we did a little practice run of going to the fallout shelters. That'll set you back a little bit when you're 10 or 11 years old. But in this case, it's talking about the drive for mass shelters. And this is a community shelter that's planned using a bridge section. And so when the sirens would, go off, you would pull over. Some of these show you parking in the grass. The people getting out and calmly going into this shelter, where they would say there's a woman in here that has an infant with her. And then if you look closely at the picture, you'll see beds. You'll see all sorts of stuff. But what about food? What about other things? What happens when the electricity goes off? Because that's going to disappear. But we're only going to worry about the bit that deals with food. So here's a picture showing what most people would assume would be what you would find in somebody's basement during the Cold War, with rations, a cot, and some other things. This is actually from the Albuquerque Museum on Nuclear Materials, and it's a great place to visit with fallout shelters and actual bombs and all sorts of different things. So now then, what are we going to have when we're talking about space in a public building? Because that's what we're really looking at. What would happen if you went, as I would have done, gone across the street to Reese's Elementary School, gone down the steps where the sign was, and then got into the basement of the school when the sirens are blowing and all sorts of different things? Well, I've shown you what they did with the water. With the water, they had the containers and stuff, and I won't go back through that. But what about the food? Well, the government would not provide anything to a facility that did not have a defensive number of 40, which means that if you were walking outside when a nuclear blast went off, you would receive radiation. They believed that if you were in a location where you could have survived 40 times that radiation, you would be okay. So that's what the basis was. You got government funding for equipment, for food, and et cetera and so on, if your building was at that 40 defensive thing minimum, okay? You also needed to have 10 square feet per person in the shelter. The government expected that you would be there for 14 days. At the end of 14 days, we would crawl out from under our ashes and either go home or to our pile of ashes and then begin recovery. Okay? I'm not talking about how much radiation or anything else there is still running around, but just simple stuff. Okay? We used to look at the subways in the Soviet Union, Russia at that time. And, oh, well, you know, they turn these into fallout shelters, which you could. I mean, subways would be good fallout shelters. You just have lots of people. What are you going to, you know, food, etc., and so on, feeding when the electricity goes out, when they flood or something. But let's stay with the elementary. So you've got the elementary school, and we assume it was a 40-plus number because it was marked. They had people who checked these things out. And the procedure, which is found in the guidebook, this is the training book on the basic course in emergency mass feeding. In this, it says you're going to be in there for 14 days. They will supply you with 10,000 calories for those 14 days. Now, you know, if you go on a diet and you're trying to go under less than 2,000 calories a day, you're going like, oh, I'm starving to death. Your caloric intake, according to this mass feeding schedule, is 750 calories a day for 14 days. And those calories are then divided up 3 ways. They tell you to do a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. And in each of those, you would receive 250 calories worth of biscuits or crackers. And they talk about a carbohydrate substance. And I've never seen a package for those. Now, I'm assuming they could be cheese, maybe the giant cans of peanut butter that they had an extra, but I've never seen those in a fallout shelter material before. They would be a good choice. But we have to assume that all I've ever seen and all most people talk about is the biscuits. It's what you find in tins. So you're going to have that, and then, of course, the water. Of course, you get basically a quart of water a day. You get 6 ounces at breakfast, 6 ounces at lunch, 6 ounces at dinner, and then you have 2 other times where you would receive 6 ounces. They're always very concerned about making sure that your name is written on that cup so that you don't cause problems with other people getting your germs. So we'll talk about some other little issues with that in a second. So let's see them. First of all, from the biscuit standpoint, you could go who knows how far back and find rations. We're very familiar with sea rations that you would have. And some of those biscuits on a British warship, they were so difficult you'd have to soak them in your wine to get them almost to be palatable. If you go to the American Civil War period, this is hardtack. So you can see this is basically the same type of material. This will, you know, you can cover it, you can seal it, it seemingly lasts forever. And then when we get to our time period, here is what the, quote, biscuit looked like in a fallout shelter. Just a single one, okay? Now, if you go, well, how does that compare to a cracker? Because that's basically what it is. It's a cracker without salt. Not on top of it, but there is salt in it. Here's the comparison of the cracker that we have today that we snack on, put peanut butter and jelly on it or a piece of cheese, with the one from the fallout shelter cans. And of course, if you compared it to the hardtack, it's obviously gigantic. Plus, it's about 5 times as thick. So that's what we have to contend with. Now, there are actually 2 kinds of containers. This container basically is one person's ration for the whole 14 days. They didn't give you your can and say, hey, here it is. Well, since we've never did it, we don't know what they would have done. The manual doesn't say anything about, do you just give everybody a can and then they open it? No, I think this is all dispensed by the people in charge of the facility. Otherwise, people would, eat up all their rations and then we'd have all hell breaking loose, okay? So, now I opened one of these. There is one of my very first YouTube shows, which is still up here. I took this can, actually, and put it on my back porch and opened it. Now, I had no idea what it was going to be like. This was, this particular can was sealed in 1961. Now, right now, it's 60 years old. Should have a birthday party for it. I should say, for them. So I didn't know. I thought this was all going to be a giant mush of mold, mildew, who knows what. So I did put on kind of a paint respirator or something, as you can see in the picture. And then I just used the can opener to open the top. And I was utterly amazed when I saw what was inside. It wasn't gooey, messy, or anything else. Basically, it looked like when you open a box of saltine crackers and you pull out a wax paper container of the crackers, that's exactly what it looked like. They were just 60 years old, that's all, when it was opening that material. And they came in chunks that, and I have some of them that are still in their original wrapping, but they would disintegrate the minute I lifted them up to show them to you. But I'll show you some pictures as I'm talking with this. But this wonderful block here is what you found when you opened the cans. So I'm not sure that modern crackers would do as well because they're not in a metal sealed, hermetically sealed according to the government, container with these. But I am holding in my hand the whole day's ration. So that can that I had in my hand had 14 segments of this material. So it's quite good. And I take that back. It's good that they had them. I have not eaten them. I would assume they're pretty stale. I would imagine they're probably actually still edible. Now, the little mass feeding thing talks about that there's two kinds of these. There's one of these. You see, this is a gold container. The other one are silver. This has bulgur. This has a little bit different recipe on the inside of it. This one, let's see, it says ingredients: wheat flour, sugar, vegetable shortening, corn flour, corn sugar. Of course we got corn sugar. Soy flour, salt, leavening, BH, butylatamine hydroxide, BTH, propyl gallate, citric acid, propylene glycol is added for preservation purposes. And this was put together by Schultz and Birch Biscuit Company, Chicago, 9, Illinois. But it's in a gold container. So we would assume that you would have a mix of these. Some people haven't seen very many of these, and frequently these are the ones that come up for sale. I guess the others were done away with, what have you. I mentioned that before, that places where they still had fallout shelters in schools and buildings, and they discovered them, they destroyed them because it was government provided and they couldn't give them away for souvenirs or anything else. So you would have those. You would have those stacked up. Those would all be in place. Now then, let's go to a look at how this goes. So here is a container which has 250 calories. This is your breakfast or your lunch or your dinner. You might pretend it's something else, but this is what you would have gotten in your 6-ounce cup of water. So I would take my time and eat this. Now, then there's a picture where I show you, here's what a whole day broken down looks like. And then, of course, you have the individual ones. On my website, I have several CDs on the Cold War. And if you buy a CD of the Cold War, I give you a free biscuit. And, of course, I have to make sure that you don't eat it. I don't want you to get sick. So I've got it sealed in these cute little stamps with the emergency sign. And then it's marked, warning, 1962 Fallout biscuit, do not eat. That one would assume people would try and eat it at some point. I doubt whether the worst thing could happen. I think that the worst thing could happen to you is you might end up getting diarrhea. So we're in the shelter. We're getting this food. You could be in the dark. Maybe it's candle lit. Get your water. And the book that I've been talking about, the Basic Emergency Feeding book, which is a course on how to run these things. This one doesn't talk anything about the psychological aspect. As a matter of fact, the cover of the Life magazine, everybody's just calmly walking in as if they're going to go to a party and relax and not worry about a 30 or 40 megaton warhead going off, turning everything into ashes. But yeah, we got to maintain that calmness. Okay, so let's get back to some of the things I mentioned in the little article, little picture. One was a woman with a child. Well, there isn't any baby food in the fallout shelter. They do say that you could mix the water with this and grind it up and make kind of a gruel. And then they tell you if you take a teaspoon and put a little of that on there and dip it a little bit into an infant's mouth, they'll then suckle it down. But they only talk about the fact that perhaps an infant should receive 1,000 calories a day and not 750. You know, you would hope that they're, of course, breastfeeding. Actually, the hope of the U.S. government, according to the mass feeding plan, was that people who needed different types of food, specialized food, or medicine or anything else, they would bring it with them. So they would expect people who had newborns or children to bring formula or what have you. Well, you know, if the siren goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're not going, and the belief was you had maybe 15 minutes. We lived in the middle of the United States in southern Missouri. We really weren't worried about being my primary target for a Soviet ICBM. My God, I don't think our shoe factory was worth that much. Our only concern was in northern Arkansas, there was the United States Chemical and Biological Warfare Center. And there were some old ICBMs that used to be in Arkansas, but they were later decommissioned. But at the height of it, there were some there. So they would have certainly been a target. So the odds of us getting ashed were kind of slim, but the fallout would be another story. Sometime look up on the internet the fallout chart for the United States, and you'll realize that the way the wind blows from west to east, being in New England is not a good thing. As a matter of fact, if you looked at a worldwide chart of fallout, you know, if we attacked China, our fallout would blow over on us. If we attacked the Soviet Union, the fallout would hit China and then go over on us. And what they hit us with eventually gets back to them. So it becomes kind of counterproductive. So you were supposed to bring your own material. Now, if you're going to bring something, I'd suggest peanut butter, jelly, and cheese. Those could be well taken care of, and the fat content and other issues with those type of things would really add calories to your environment. So it's just fortunate we didn't have to do that. Okay, but they're always talking about, oh yes, well, people will bring this material with them, and it never dawned on me at that time. We just assumed, and I don't think there was any adult that felt like, well, we needed to bring anything. I think maybe if my dad was going to bring something, he'd make sure he had a pack of cigarettes or so, or a carton of cigarettes, and obviously would need some money. But as far as anything else, we lived across the street, so I assume my dad believed under the worst case scenario, we could sneak out of the shelter periodically, run over and get some canned products that my mother had made and bring them back. So but it's a little different if you're in the big city and you're with X number of people. And to talk about a high-rise situation, that if you're in a high-rise building, well, you could move the location of where you serve the food to different levels. And I'm thinking, if you've got a high-rise, that means you're in a city. And I'll guarantee you it was targeted. And I doubt whether the top part of that even exists anymore. But It really is. If you want to go back and just see how naive everybody was, you would be absolutely astonished. So once again, you've seen the different pictures of what the material looks like, what the biscuits look like. And, today the government tells you to keep some supplies in case of an emergency. Electricity goes out, and here in the Midwest, it's not uncommon to have ice storms and tornadoes and things like that. But we're usually talking about canned goods. I think the best one of the pamphlets on what you should have to protect yourself during an attack, nuclear attack, was from the state of New York. And they had like 6 pages of type of canned goods, what kind of dried milk, all sorts of these type of things that you should have available to you. And they suggested not just 2 weeks, but a month. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's fortunate we didn't have to use those. But we have one other thing that I want to talk about with the fallout material, and I'll do that next time. And that is, what kind of scientific equipment did you find in the fallout shelter? Because you're just not going to sit there for 14 days and somebody goes, okay, we've been here 14 days. Let's get up and get the hell out of here. Now, they had something, because you had to check the radiation. And I'm going to show you 3 different things. They sold a house version. So Bendix Corporation, which I particularly find appropriate. Bendix made the nuclear triggers for our atomic bombs. The Bendix Corporation also sold a home radiation detection kit. So if you had your own shelter, you'd be taken care of. Then I'll show you what was in the actual fallout shelter. And you'll be underwhelmed. And then I will show you the Cadillac of equipment. It's a Swiss NBC kit. It's a trunk, small trunk, that was in all fallout shelters in Switzerland during the Cold War. It's called an NBC kit because it was nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare. And they have the Cadillac of what you would need in a shelter. So anyway, as I said before, I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.